Less than a year ago today, Jack Della Maddalena was the welterweight champion of the world. Today, after losses to Islam Makhachev and Carlos Prates, fans are questioning everything about him. They're questioning his confidence, toughness. They're questioning whether he was ever championship material to begin with. And while I think some fans' criticisms go too far, I also think the Prates fight exposed a very real problem. A problem with the way he fights and the way he's built his success. Because for the first time in his career, Jack Della Maddalena looked like a fighter who couldn't control what was happening to him. Before we talk about the future of Jack Della Maddalena, it's important that we discuss the fighter and the version of himself that brought him to where he is today. Because one of the strangest narratives to come out of the Carlos Prates fight is the narrative that he's a quitter. And honestly, if you follow Jack's career, it's hard to think of a label that fits him less. Jack started his professional career 0-2, and then he went on an 18-fight consecutive win streak. He rebuilt his career from the ground up and turned himself into one of the best welterweights in the entire world. And don't forget the Burns fight, where Jack Della Maddalena broke his arm and still used it as a post to get himself back up to his feet and win the fight. He was smashing Gilbert's head with his broken arm. That's not the resume of a fighter who's looking for a way out. For years, Jack built his reputation as one of the most resilient fighters in the division, which is exactly why the Prates fight was so shocking. Because fans didn't just see Jack lose. We'd seen Jack lose to Islam already. Carlos imposed his will on Jack in Jack's own realm. He broke Jack Della in front of his own home crowd. And Jack Della Maddalena was never a fighter who had one superior attribute to everybody else. He always relied on his boxing, but he was never the fastest guy in the division. He was never the strongest, never the tallest, never the smartest, never the slickest. His opponent might start strong in a fight, but the X factor for Jack Della Maddalena was that he was going to work his way back into any matchup. His clean boxing combinations that were very aesthetically pleasing made us all hope that Jack Della Maddalena's style would be able to translate at the highest level of the welterweight division. During his fight with Bilal Muhammad, we saw JDM's peak in the sport so far. He had a great performance where people try to act like Bilal didn't wrestle, but JDM just neutralized the takedowns from Bilal, and he showed awesome evolutions in the pocket, in the clinch, and also just with his boxing combinations in general. It was a bit of a war with Bilal Muhammad, which left some questions to be answered, but it was still a good performance. And going on to call out Islam Makhachev, the sky was the limit for JDM after this fight. But the fight with Islam is where we started to see cracks in the game of Jack Della Maddalena. Islam dictated the pace of the fight against Jack like no one else had before. Islam used his leg kick extremely well to control the distance of the fight, and he wouldn't let himself get into careless boxing exchanges with a guy who was way better in the boxing, obviously. He took no chances in this fight. He left Jack extremely reactive, and Jack was no longer making any reads. And that was important because Jack was a guy who we assumed would be a problem solver in this fight, who would be able to find a way to stuff the takedown and who would be able to work his way back to a dominant position and come back later. But even after not succeeding in defeating the greatest fighter of all time in Islam Makhachev, Jack Della Maddalena was still not looking too bad. A lot of us Jack Della fans were thinking, okay, well he lost to a wrestler, right? If he fights a striker in his own realm, he's going to be able to win this fight at any level in the welterweight division. Because Jack Della Maddalena in his boxing and his high guard is one of the best fighters in the entire 170-pound division. He's one of the best strikers. So surely, I understand that this was a tough matchup, but his next fight shouldn't be as bad. But even back on November 15th, 2025, right after the Islam fight, I was thinking to myself, I really don't want Jack Della Maddalena to fight Carlos Prates.
A few moments later.
I know this might sound stupid to some of you guys, but one thing that really stood out to me during this fight week was the difference in energy between both of the fighters. I don't have to tell you guys about Carlos Prates' usual detached, low inhibited self. We've seen him throughout this whole UFC run be like this, where he's calm, relaxed, he's almost indifferent to the moment. Whereas for Jack, he had all the pressure on his back fighting in his hometown of Perth, coming off the biggest loss of his career. He knew that if he would lose against an opponent like Prates, it would not only be humiliating, but it's going to be extremely painful as well. He wouldn't even get near Carlos during face-offs. Now, does that mean Jack was afraid? Absolutely not. These are elite fighters at the highest level of the sport. But fear and respect are just not the same thing in MMA. And Carlos Prates is one of the few fighters in the welterweight division that forces you to acknowledge the consequences of every mistake that you make against him. And when you're fighting someone with that kind of power, your decision-making changes, your willingness to engage is just not the same. Your margin for error just completely disappears. And a scrappy guy like Jack Della Maddalena can't rely on his chin like he used to. And as soon as the cage door closed and this fight started, it was obvious that this anxiety that I was feeling about JDM and Prates as a matchup was real. Because as soon as they started fighting, Carlos Prates was using his range, his size, and his power better than ever before. We'd formerly seen Ian Gary technically outclass him. And, Jack Della Maddalena fans were picking him on the basis that he was going to be able to use his footwork and his boxing to somehow be the matador to Carlos Prates. But the truth is that GDM just never had a style to do that against a guy like Carlos Prates. Jack was reacting, Jack was backing up, Jack was essentially trying to survive in this fight. For the first time in his UFC career, he looked physically overwhelmed in the fight. I know he got overwhelmed by the takedowns against Islam, but it was completely different in the striking here. He broke with the same strike that Islam showed as well, the best tool to use against Jack, which is the leg kick. Jack stands so heavy on his lead leg that it leaves him completely open to the calf kick and the leg kick, and he can't defend it at all. And the use of the high guard made him eat devastating knees from Carlos Prates. I think 16 knees to be exact. Completely brutal. And you can't talk about this fight without talking about Carlos Prates' run right now. There's not a more fitting nickname for a fighter than the Nightmare than Carlos Prates. Signing a fight with this guy is genuinely guaranteeing yourself a night of pain and suffering. He throws every shot with insane power and a ton of confidence because he has no respect for what's coming back at him at all. I can only describe the uncanny way that he catapults his bony extremities into you. There's no word for it. Carlos Prates has an unmatched fear factor, and if you choose to engage him on the feet, you're going to be playing his game unless you're the technical level of Ian Gary or you possess a significant grappling threat. Fans aren't really reacting to the knockout itself, they're reacting to the feeling of the fight, which I know we all felt during JDM versus Prates. Even the announcers were saying that they wanted to look away because of how brutal it was. This fight was genuinely hard to watch. He was never the one making adjustments. He wasn't the one imposing his will at all. And when a former champion spends his entire fight looking overwhelmed, fans are immediately going to start questioning whether they even belonged in the first place. They're immediately going to start saying things they've never said before. But instead of calling Jack Della Maddalena a quitter, I think that it's more about the new generation of welterweights just being a completely different breed. During JDM's rise, the fighters at the top of the welterweight division were mostly average height boxers with wrestling bases, guys like Kamaru Usman, Colby Covington, Bilal Muhammad, and even Tyron Woodley, who was on his way out during the beginning of JDM's run. But if you look at the guys today, the meta has completely changed at welterweight, at least in the top 5. Carlos Prates, a natural disaster who's left all but one of his UFC opponents laying flat on their back. A striker that's evolved, whose every twitch in the octagon is hurting his opponent to their destruction. Shavkat Rakhmonov, a predator without a preferred method of kill. Every man who's ever stepped in the cage with Shavkat's left defeated, whether they were pounded into submission or strangled into it. There is no safety with Shavkat anywhere the fight goes. Ian Gary, the mastermind who beneath all the noise outside the cage is one of the most intelligent and physically gifted fighters in the world. While he immerses himself in the sport of MMA, he studies the tendencies and reactions of his opponents and dismantles his opponents with range, precision, and size. Michael Morales, an anomaly blessed with physical gifts that only comes every few generations. As big and powerful as some middleweights with the speed of a lightweight. Everything we've known about welterweights tells us that Michael Morales should not exist. A seemingly unstoppable force whose strength we don't fully understand at the top level. These fighters are longer, they're more dynamic, they're more versatile, they're harder to pressure in boxing range. That's a problem with somebody of the skill set of Jack Della Maddalena. Jack isn't bad, he's just outmatched. The next fight of Jack Della Maddalena's career is without a doubt going to be the most important one, at least in my opinion. Because not for a title or for a ranking, but Jack Della Maddalena needs to prove that he can evolve as a fighter. Can he deal with elite physicality? Can he deal with range? Can he deal with a power threat? The thing that worries me the most is, can he deal with an opponent who has true fear factor? To me, JDM broke in the fight with Carlos Prates, not only because of all the damage he was taking, but it felt like he had been defeated before he even stepped into the octagon. The entire night, he wasn't doing the things necessary that he needed to do to win. Can he win when he's not controlling every second of a fight? Because if he can't, then the Prates fight won't just have been an upset. It won't just have been a crazy dominant performance. It'll be a glimpse into the future for Jack's career. And looking at these welterweight rankings, it's not going to be easy for Jack no matter how he goes about things. He could fight Sean Brady, who's going to be a tough grappling matchup, and he's going to try to replicate exactly what Islam did to him. I think he's got a bit more of a submission threat, but I think that Jack Della Maddalena could probably find the shot on the feet if he is who we think he is. Against Leon Edwards, I am worried for Jack Della Maddalena. Leon Edwards is a legit grappler on the. We saw that against Carlos Prates. He's able to take your back and control the round. And Leon Edwards also has excellent use of leg kicks, which is one of JDM's biggest flaws. I think I might pick Leon Edwards in this fight, and a lot of people would be picking JDM. Joaquin Buckley, I think JDM can beat him. I think that's a winnable fight for Jack Della 100%. And I also think Yaroslav Amosov might be a good test for Jack Della Maddalena, because as good as his grappling is, we know that his striking isn't really what it's made out to be. He does have nice flipping kicks and stuff, but we saw in the fight with Jason Jackson that he can be broken. And against fighters like Bonfim, Mike Mallet, and Uros Medic, I think that Jack Della Maddalena has a fair shot against those guys. I don't think Jack Della Maddalena is a quitter. I don't think he's washed. I don't think he was ever a fake champion. But I do think that Carlos Prates showed a fundamental flaw in his game. That while Jack Della Maddalena is fantastic on the front foot when he's throwing boxing combinations, pressing in on you, he's a great hammer, but he's not a good nail. He's not the one who can take damage well. And the problem with this new generation of welterweights is that's going to become a reality with all of these fighters. These fighters are more physical than him. They have more well-rounded styles than him. They're more rangy than him. Jack Della Maddalena's frame, JDM's frame does not translate well to the top 5. And I think that his seat in the top 10 itself is going to be very hotly contested with some very game contenders who are going to be tough matchups for him, like Leon Edwards. So the future for Jack Della Maddalena isn't about getting his belt back. It's about proving that he can evolve as a fighter, because that's what the best contenders do in these divisions. They can lose a fight, look down the rankings, and still beat an up-and-comer to prove that they belong in that division. That's what great fighters like Justin Gaethje, Dustin Poirier, Kamaru Usman, many great contenders in all these divisions have done in the past. If Jack can replicate that, then he'll prove to everyone that he's not just a quitter. He was just outmatched stylistically by two of the best fighters in the division. And if he can't, well then we'll remember that fight with Prates as the day that the UFC welterweight division finally caught up with JDM. I'm a big JDM fan who glazed him a lot on his come up, so I really hope that he can get back to his winning ways, but I did start to lose a little confidence after his last fight. It was really scary. And, even as a JDM fan, I had to cash in on the Carlos Prates money. It sucks, but, I'm not going to lose money just because of my favorite fighter. I really hope that he can get back to his winning ways soon. Like, honestly, the Carlos Prates loss was painful. I felt that for a few days, if I'm being honest. Like, I'm not even gonna lie. Like, I couldn't stop talking about it with people around me. How much I was like, what, man, I feel like a family member died watching that. It was awful. Anyways, make sure you guys like and subscribe. Make sure you follow me on TikTok at Bro Watches MMA, and I'll see you guys in the next video.